So as we start talking about Gatsby, we'll start a new section here. So Zoe, who seems to have won the MVP award here, so shame on all of you. So Zoe points out about Gatsby, this quote, "He was never quite still, there was always a tapping foot somewhere or the impatient opening and closing of a hand. I find this to be quite fascinating and relevant to the character. The fact that he constantly needs to move makes me think that there is something not quite right with him, that he's either nervous or has something that bothers him slightly for the majority of the time." Right. I think maybe that she's writing that before learning more about him. But yeah, that certainly makes sense with what we learn about him. Has Gatsby had lunch with Meyer Wolfsheim yet? The guy who fixed the World Series? Have we had that scene? Yeah? Okay. What did we think about that? What did that tell us? Anything? I think that Meyer Wolfsheim is actually a very important character. Yeah.
I have a question about that Wolfsheim guy.
Mm-hmm.
What are cufflinks and why did he have human teeth?
Yeah, it's smaller.
Like, what was up with that?
So cufflinks, those are good questions. Cufflinks are on a shirt, on what's called a French cuff style shirt. Cufflinks would be, instead of a button here, I have another buttonhole like this, and then I have a piece of jewelry that fastens those two buttonholes together. Right, so I have some shirts like this. My flannel plaid shirts are not of that sort. So cufflinks are very fancy. So probably were more common in the 1920s than they are now, but I have cufflinks that I only would wear when I'm also wearing a pocket watch and a three-piece suit kind of thing. Now, as to why he would have human teeth in his cufflinks, I think an equally important question to that would be not only why did he have human teeth in his cufflinks, but why did he want people to know that he had human teeth in his cufflinks? There are some obvious conclusions here that I don't want you to hesitate to reach, and I don't want to dictate conclusions to you. But so we're told that this guy, so Gatsby tells Nick later that Wolfsheim fixed the World Series. Does that, you guys know what that means? Yes? Baseball. So there was a scandal in, I want to say like 1917 or something like that. The Black Sox scandal. It's an actual historical thing, not from Gatsby, where the World Series was fixed. There was a team that lost on purpose, and there was, the mafia was involved in betting scandals and bookies and all that kind of stuff. So obviously all of that is complicated, but so Wolfsheim is a fictional character, but we're attributing to him the credit for this sort of sports scandal, sports betting scandal, where a team threw a game or a series on purpose. And baseball has no shortage of these types of scandals. I shouldn't say those types of scandals, but lots of scandals anyways. So that is supposed to be hinting at us that this guy is some sort of, that he's mafia or gang something. So his flashing those cufflinks, you guys ever see pictures of The Rock? He's always, that's his pose, right? Playing with the cufflinks, it's standard The Rock pose. Anyways, so that is a mobster thing to do, right? by telling people that he's got human teeth in his cufflinks, he's saying, this is what happened to the suckers what messed with me. Right? This is a serious dude. So Gatsby's having lunch with this guy. We're supposed to come to some sort of a conclusion here about where Gatsby's money comes from. Right? It's not old money like Tom, or Gatsby would have never been in the war in the first place. It's new money, and it's not clean money. It's so we don't know what the details are, but we don't really need to. We just know that Gatsby has apparently just made all of this money just so he could impress Daisy. Apparently that was his whole goal. So he's gotten involved with the mob just to impress a girl, which I don't know how effective that usually is, but probably it works for some girls, I don't know. None of you, I'm sure. No. Okay. Gatsby isn't innocent as to what Daisy feels for him, and perhaps it goes vice versa. I'm not sure what she means by that exactly. It almost seems as if Gatsby is using Nick to get to Daisy. Whether Nick's whole situation is as innocent as it seems. Maybe this is all part of a plan which Gatsby has devised. Yes, it is. I think we can just say yes to that one and move on. So Gatsby now, whether he's telling the truth or not, states that yes, he did inherit his money, but no, he didn't. And as we just discussed, we already have good reason to think that he is lying about that, but that doesn't seem to bother Nick. Like Nick, having met Wolfsheim and heard that story, he's clearly, we would expect that he has his suspicions about where Gatsby's money comes from. So he shouldn't be buying this story about Gatsby inheriting the money. And yet he seems to pretend at least to believe it. But he lost most of it in the panic of the war. I find that statement, quite interesting, as the majority of the general public would not know that. Then he reveals he was in the drug business and the oil business, not letting on the business he's in currently. So why would it be important for him to have it out there that he had inherited this money and had lost it?
But he could explain why he was still trying to make the money.
Yeah, it's an explanation for why he's grinding for the dollars now. But why couldn't he have been poor to start with? Why would it be important that he had been wealthy before? This is not something that most of us are used to thinking about, but this is a social issue, and this is the difference between East Egg and West Egg. And we can even sort of extend that idea of East Egg and West Egg to be East Coast and West Coast. And I don't know how much thought you've put into that. I'm going to guess very little. I wouldn't have at your age either. But this is the divide between the old money and the new money. Right? The old money has a lot of prestige, and the old money is associated with the high class. Like, there are just a better breed of people. The new money is all dirty and they don't know what to do with it, and they're clowns. They build these horrible garish houses and do really unsophisticated things. It's the nouveau riche is a phrase that's often used, and so it's the divide between. In Europe, you would think about the old aristocracy, right, the hereditary sort of nobility, and the bourgeoisie, right, the new business class rich people who hadn't been rich for generations and therefore didn't really know what they should be doing with their newfound riches, right? And so Gatsby wants to associate himself with that old money, not the new money. So for most of us, we don't think about things like that. We just think, and I'm going to assume that none of you are a great deal wealthier than, the average person. For most of us, we just think, yeah, it would be nice to have some money. And more money would be nice too. And, oh crap, I forgot to buy a lottery ticket for the $60 million yesterday. That was me just remembering something out loud. But for most of us, we don't think about kinds of money. When you don't have money, any money is good money, right? But when you do have money, you want to be associated with the high class money, not the pro athlete clown money. You want to be sophisticated money, right? And so that's what Gatsby is trying to associate himself with, and we learn that obviously the reason he's trying to associate himself with that old money is because that's the sort of thing that he thinks that Daisy wants. Comments, responses? So East Egg and West Egg, the East Coast of the United States is the first place that was settled, and that's where you have Connecticut and Maryland and New York and the high-end universities, Oxford and so on. Not Oxford in England, Harvard, I meant to say. This is where you have the sort of American nobility class. Right? The West Coast is where there are, right, California is where there are new rich people, right? People who've got rich doing new things, like newfangled stuff like movies and television, right? That's not aristocratic. That's just, you're still just a common person who happens to have lots of money, right? And maybe as I say, you probably haven't given that much thought. Those of us who don't have fabulous riches generally don't give much thought to whether or not we're the right kind of rich. Gatsby is letting us know that there is a real divide. And so when F. Scott Fitzgerald, so East Egg and West Egg are fictional, right? These places aren't real. And so he's definitely telling us, old school East Coast versus newfangled West Coast. The allegory is quite clear there. So in chapter 6, we discover that Gatsby changed his name at the age of 17, and it appears that he changed his name to change who he was. He wanted to become someone different. The most interesting thing about this story is how it focuses on the importance of the name, as if it was because of the name Gatsby and only because of the name Gatsby that he changed. In Romeo and Juliet, ooh, this is good now. We're quoting Romeo and Juliet. Juliet says, "What's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other name would smell as sweet." This brings up the question, does what you are called truly define who and what you are? Gatsby certainly seemed to think so. But the real question is why? Why is it so important, or what is so important about the name Gatsby And what made Gatsby believe that changing something as simple as a name would change who he was? Well, I think that we have kind of just answered that question, right? So, have they told us yet what his name was before?
Yeah, something like James Gatsby or something. James Gatsby.
Yeah, Gats. Yeah. So the name Gats, what sort of ethnicity does that sound like to you? Does it sound British? You guys are all like, I only know what Mennonite name sounds like. All other names are the same to me. Okay, so fair enough. So a lesson in names then. Gatsby sounds like it could be a British name, could be an English name. I don't have any knowledge that it is, but it doesn't need to actually be. It sounds as though it could be. And that would go with his story about being an Oxford man. And that will go with his story of inheriting money and his attempt to portray himself as part of that old, almost nobility, right? That old money. Gats sounds as though it's, I don't know, Polish, Hungarian, or something. It sounds very like what would have been new immigrant-y at the time. It sounds Eastern European. It definitely does not sound British. And that would have put him in a lower social class. Now, I think, well, maybe Steinbach is the wrong place to be discussing this, how names connect to social class. But I think that as society in general, just to give you, my view of what you might call the outside world, I think that we have certainly progressed to a point where people with Polish last names are not discriminated against for having Polish last names, nor Irish, nor Icelandic, nor anything else like that. Now we're mostly just concerned about whether or not you're white, and we're not counting whiteness in terms of how British you are. It's just appearance now that serves as the basis for discrimination. But certainly what we would now call racism, the term wouldn't apply as neatly, but there was just as much ethnic discrimination against Icelanders in Manitoba 100 years ago, even though Icelanders are obviously as white as you can get. There was just as much discrimination against Ukrainians. And it varies by parts of the country. In the United States, in the early part of the last century, there would have been a lot of discrimination against the Irish. And you would think, like, well, who would even think about those sorts of things anymore? Like Irish or Scandinavian or Polish, like no one would care, I think. I don't know. Maybe Mennonites would care, and I'm totally wrong about that. But most places, nobody would care about that. But in the early part of the 20th century, he wants to take care that he does not sound like a recent immigrant, right? That his family is new to the United States. He wants to sound like he's part of the old guard. And that's part of what that name thing is. So does that Does that all kind of make sense to you? I don't know how much of that idea, I guess, that concept would be familiar to you, this sort of discrimination based on country of origin. So I suppose if you think about it that way, and this thought is just occurring to me now, if you think about it that way, then racism is actually better than what was before. That's still not good, obviously, but at least you don't have to hate everyone whose last name is ethnically different than yours, or in Steinbach isn't exactly the same as yours. Ba-doom. Crickets. Okay, Kaylee, after reading chapters 4 to 7, we've found out quite a bit more about Gatsby. Have we ever? We now know that he got some of his money from inheritance, some from other jobs. We know he came from a wealthy family. He was part of the war, and he went to Oxford because that's where his family has been going for generations. Now, this is all, at least, we think we know this about Gatsby. But we don't, we're relying on what Nick's recollections are telling us, or what Nick wants us to believe, or what Gatsby wants Nick to believe. We're not entirely sure about this, but this is what we think we know about him. Even though we've learned a lot about Gatsby, to me, he still seems suspicious because of the way he acts around certain people and tells stories. When he tells a story about himself, he always leaves out certain details or doesn't share the full story. He seems to be very selective with what information he shares and with who he shares it with. So just a grammar point on that one, Kaylee. With whom he shares it. You don't have to say with twice, and who should be whom there. He seems to be very selective. Oh yeah, that's the same sentence. Also, I'm interested to find out more about the history between Gatsby and Daisy. If they only knew each other for a short amount of time before he left for the war, then why does he care so much about her 5 years later? This is also a very interesting question. So do the rest of you think this as well, that he still seems suspicious about the way that he acts, even if we do know more of his story now? Yeah. Anna? No? Okay, so what about, I want to say it was chapter 3. At the party, Nick is talking to Gatsby, and they've more or less just met. And Jordan has previously told Nick that Gatsby told her that he was an Oxford man, but that she doesn't believe him. You remember that? Okay. Jordan says, he told me he's an Oxford man, but I don't believe it. She doesn't seem to, be terribly concerned about it. She just mentions that she doesn't believe it. And then Gatsby tells the same thing to Nick, and Nick says, oh, I see why she says that. Right? He says, and I'm not 100% sure about what chapter this was in, but you certainly have read this part. Gatsby tells Nick that he's an Oxford man, and Nick immediately thinks to himself, oh, I get why Jordan didn't believe him. Like that, he didn't sell me on that. There seems something off about the way that he said it. So when we have two characters doubting that Gatsby is telling the truth here, we should also doubt whether he's telling the truth here. And if we doubt that aspect of his story, then maybe we have grounds to doubt other aspects of his story as well. So the only thing that we really know for sure about Gatsby is that he and Daisy knew each other for a short period maybe. I think they both corroborate that, but they knew each other before the war. And that's literally all we know for sure. You guys on board with that? Can I say that? Okay. There might be something else I'm not thinking of right now. But that's literally all we know for sure. The rest of this stuff, I don't know. It could be a story that he's telling, and we've seen from the fact that he changed his name that he's concerned with this image, and that image could be a good reason to lie about other parts of the story as well. This last question that Kaylee asks, if they only knew each other for a short amount of time before he left for the war, then why does he care so much about her 5 years later? Anybody else have this thought? Is it, how do we react to this? So so Gatsby does seem to be what you might call an incurable romantic, or you might call a crazy stalker, depending on how favorably you would look upon that sort of thing. And certainly, this would have been considered incredibly romantic until more recently. And I think more recently, we would start to look at this as being, wow, that's pretty crazy stalkerish behavior. Right? Like that's, no? And some of you seem to think that that's pretty stalkerish. He bought a house across the bay from her because it was across the bay from her.
And then he never talked to her anyway.
And never talked to her anyways. He threw huge parties in the hopes that she would eventually accidentally come to one of them.
Yeah, like where's his proactivity? Like can't you just be like, hey neighbors, want to party sometime? Instead of just being like, oh, I hope she shows up.
Well, there is that. So
Like you would think that if you would, follow her for 5 years, he would have some proactive stuff with him.
you would think that, wouldn't you? You would think that he could be more proactive. After this 5-year chase, that he could just, I don't know, drop a card in her mailbox or something.
But maybe he wants it to be her own decision. Maybe he doesn't want to invite her because when you invite someone, I feel like if I go and personally invite someone, they're always going to be like, yeah, unless they have like a specific reason to. But I think he wants it so that she'll be like, oh, well, let's just head over to Gatsby's to hang out with him or something.
Like he wants to feel it's not like a one-sided thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's for sure. Now, the stalker angle is interesting here because he's not a stalker in the sense that he is, nonstop phoning her and showing up at her door and in the bushes outside of her window or something like that, right? So he's not that kind of a dangerous stalker, but he's clearly obsessed to what, can we agree that this is an unhealthy obsession? This is unhealthy, right? And so no matter what one might think about the existence of true love, that's just ridiculous. Like, come on now. No one is that special. And this is a really important lesson for all of you right now, quite outside the book. No one is that special. And certainly not anyone that you dated for a month 5 years ago. Not when you were 12, right, obviously, but something for you to keep in mind. I think that this is, I'm conflicted personally about what I think that Fitzgerald wanted us to think about Gatsby. I know I used the word think too many times in that sentence, but I hope you followed with me on that. Did Fitzgerald want us to think of Gatsby as a sort of a romantic hero? Like, is it admirable that he has been devoted to this one girl that he dated 5 years ago, or was it longer? I know, who cares? I think they said it was 5 years ago. the fact that he's been devoted to that girl this whole time, is that intended to be admirable? Are we supposed to think like, oh, what a guy, you know? Or are we supposed to think, wow, he's a little bit mentally unbalanced. I'm glad I'm not that crazy. Like, what are we supposed to think? I know what I do think. I know that I think that he's a little bit unbalanced, and being that obsessed about anything or anybody, you know, unless it's hockey, then it's okay. But being obsessed about anything to that degree is not healthy. Robin?
I think that we could have been thinking about him like that, except for all the points that he made about him going like into the drug business, and then I don't know, usually stories where a guy's like going to catch a girl, he doesn't just sit across the bay from her for a few years, you know? Like he usually goes and like continuously makes steps towards it.
Yes.
I feel like that could have been a crazy awesome love story, but then it was just like, oh, but he's a druggie and then he's also like a weirdo.
Okay, so I'm gonna restate a bit of that, and I kind of wish that I had given you the microphone before you said that, because the mic isn't going to have picked all that up, and it was great. First of all, the druggy bit is, I think you're off base on that one, and I think you've missed out on, this is the era of prohibition. So he's made his money on booze, bootlegging alcohol, right? That's what's being hinted at here, and it's eventually going to be revealed for sure, more or less for sure, I think. But that's what it's being hinted at here the whole time. He's a bootlegger.
But he doesn't drink.
But he doesn't drink.
Yeah, that's rule number 1, don't drink the stuff you're selling.
Probably successful drug dealers don't do all the drugs either. I mean, I'm guessing, right? But I'm sure there's some sort of a code about that or something. Certainly, the other part about what you said was about him being so passive, and maybe he could have been a romantic hero if he had pursued Daisy more directly, more consistently, more aggressively, but which is a fair point. But we can also maybe give him credit for, I can't remember who it was that said that he seemed to be at great pains to want this to happen naturally. He wanted it to be her choice, or her, like, he wanted to make it possible for her to bump into him, but he wasn't going to force that to happen. And he wanted, you know, to get more of a genuine reaction, I guess, out of her when it did happen. And so eventually he resorts to like, oh, wait, I heard you're Daisy's cousin. We're best pals now. And so now, then it makes sense, right, why he wants to be friends with Nick all of a sudden. So could we see him as a romantic hero? Definitely, and many people have. I am conflicted about that a bit myself. Just the way that he's gone about it seems to be, I don't know, difficult to. Are we out of space again?
10% left.
Oh, okay. That's okay. I'm sure I'll stop talking in the next 10%, right?
Okay.
Logic would dictate. So we're sort of left to decide for ourselves how much of a hero Gatsby should be. We can remember what Nick told us at the beginning. Gatsby turned out all right in the end. I don't know if that tells us anything, but he is the great Gatsby, and this is presumably Nick who's telling us this, right? This is Nick who is calling him the great Gatsby. If we're telling the story from Nick's perspective, so we'll give him credit for the title. So he thinks that this guy's great, despite being a rum runner. Yeah.
It was also pointed out that Nick was there was one line where it was like, since he's getting to his 30s now, or like he figured that it was his birthday, and since he's getting to his 30s, or he's going, was he going into his 30s or was he
He
finished?
just turned 30.
Okay, he just turned 30, so he's going into his 30s, and he said something about like never, like getting a girl or like something, like that was kind of out of the picture now, so maybe he thinks of Gatsby as like greater because he's has a woman now. That might be a little bit of
Yeah, that's possible. That's an explanation. Gatsby's greatness because of his ability to actually get the girl that Nick doesn't. Yeah, that's possible. Certainly, I think it's fair to say, just as we kind of move on from this point, that we can be both impressed and a little bit appalled by Gatsby at the same time, right? Not everything has to be black and white. We can be impressed by his dedication to Daisy, at the same time as we're a little bit freaked out by the obsessiveness of it. Let's move on from that. We learned a lot more about Gatsby in the last few chapters. He shared more of his background, like the two businesses he was in, his inheritance of money, and ancestry in San Francisco. Although Gatsby revealed more information about himself, it still makes me wonder what else we don't know about him. He hurried the phrase, and this was my point as well, educated at Oxford, or swallowed it or choked on it as though it had bothered him before. Gatsby still comes across suspicious when he speaks, especially since he is particular with what information he reveals and to whom. So I guess instead of me talking for the last few minutes, I could have just read what Taylor wrote and saved myself the time, because that's kind of what I had said. Gatsby changed his name at 17. This confuses me. It seems as if Gatsby wanted a fresh start, and he thought changing his name would make an impact. Is this more or less ridiculous than a 17-year-old here changing their name so that they could be in the same cohort as their friend? I'll leave that to you to decide. This is very suspicious to me, and I think there is more to this. And yep, you're absolutely right. And I think that I covered that fairly well. Gatsby clearly doesn't want anyone to find out about his true past. He's obviously accustomed to lying about it, and he's adding details whenever someone presses him about. See, I'm doing this upside down. You know, it's hard to mouse like to the side and backwards. Makes me wonder if some of those details will come back to haunt him later, especially because Tom is suspicious of his past already. I don't think I should say anything about that right now, Abby. I think I will let you discover the rest of that. Yeah, you picked up also on the fact that we need to be suspicious of Gatsby in general. As much as we might admire his schmomanciness. Jesslyn, in these few chapters, I feel as though Gatsby tells us some stories about his past and we can get to know the character a little more. But I feel as though there is a lot more to unpack about his past, and I'm hoping that it will come up in the last 3 chapters. It will. Every time Gatsby tells someone about himself, it feels as though he is holding back information from everyone. Also, like Taylor said, he changed his name at 17, which is a very strong message. What would have happened to a 17-year-old boy to make him want to change his name? So we can think of plenty of people have changed their name because somebody with their family name did something appalling. Like, for example, there's no one left named Hitler in the world anymore, even though there were plenty of them at one time, but no one wants to be associated with that name anymore, understandably, and so there aren't any. There's almost no one left named Adolf either, but there's still a few. My town is still called St. Adolphe, so But that's, it's French, it's not German, so it's different. I don't know. It's different. The other thing, again, like I said, the not wanting to be associated with the sort of lower class, new immigrant-y sort of names. There were, now I grew up in a largely Ukrainian town. Now the town had been founded by, the town is called Yorkton, and it's founded by the British. It's a very British name, but through the sort of middle part, like the 30s, 40s, and 50s of the last century, there was a lot of immigration from the Ukraine, and Joseph Stalin and all of that, right? And the same reason a lot of Mennonites would have left the Europe at the time. It was not a safe place for them. The Ukrainians were largely in the same sort of boat. And so there were, I don't know what the statistics would have been, but it seemed like there were more Ukrainians than not there, which was fine. Lots of pierogies. It's great. Lots of good sausage too. A lot like here, actually. Good pierogies, sausage. I have a lot of that background in common. Anyways, a lot of the Ukrainians had last names like Williams and Jones. And you're like, what? That's not a very Ukrainian name. And it turns out that a lot of them came here and changed their last names because they were afraid of being discriminated against or just wanted to fit in better. And so took what they thought were more Canadian type of names. Or they chopped some of the skis and chucks off the ends of their names to make them more, I don't know, North American sounding, I guess. So, for instance, there was a girl that I went to school with whose last name had been Stelmakowicz, which I think was Polish, but her family had changed the name to Stelmach, which doesn't really seem like anything in particular, but it's easy and straightforward and not definitively from anywhere, which is kind of perfect. Like, it's almost, in North America, if your name doesn't distinctively sound like it's from someplace, then that's almost the best case scenario. So may have been some of that at play. Okay. One thing I noticed about Gatsby's character is that he seemed in a way lost, as if losing Daisy those 5 years ago caused him to lose part of himself too. He also seems to truly care, especially about Daisy, even though there are times when no one seems to care in return. Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that as much as we suspect Gatsby of lying and we suspect him of being a bootlegger, we don't really suspect him of being a bad person, if that kind of makes sense. Like, he seems like a genuinely nice guy, even if he's not so genuine about himself or his past. What time have we got here? 2:30. Okay.